Now, before I get started here, I'll quickly try to answer the question some of you will no doubt have right at the start. Why compare these two movies? Sure, they may be similar in some respects, but they're also very different in many others. It's the proverbial comparing apples to oranges here. Only problem is, I think there is one respect in which these two movies are very, very similar to each other. They're both essentially lead-ups to the final chapter of a much grander story of a franchise, even though both these franchises will indeed go on after these upcoming finales. Basically, what I mean here is that Infinity War and The Last Jedi are both movies that immediately precede another movie that will be the culmination of an entire franchise worth of movies before it. They're the second to last act, if you will. Yes, there are two more Marvel movies between now and the next part of Infinity War, and many more movies that will come after it. But Infinity War was the setup for a movie that will be the conclusion of the first three phases of the Marvel Universe, and one that'll likely radically reshape whatever comes after. It's a movie that'll wrap up 10 years and roughly 20 other movies and set the stage for something different going forward, just like The Last Jedi was the final movie before Episode 9, which will wrap up the previous two Star Wars trilogies, and this new one of course, and no doubt be the dawn of something new for Star Wars. Yet both of these movies went about that setup in very, very different ways, and one of them, Infinity War, has been almost unanimously praised by its fans, while the other, The Last Jedi, has divided its fandom into something akin to warring factions who oftentimes won't even try to see the other side's point of view. And I know many of you will say that, in the case of Star Wars, it's only a vocal minority that really hated this movie and are somehow destroying the Rotten Tomatoes score, for example. But if that's the case, where is the vocal minority against Infinity War? Why isn't there a faction of fans that are rallying against this movie and filling YouTube with hate videos about it? And in an effort to make this a fair video here, not just one that bashes The Last Jedi like some of you might be expecting out of me, Star Wars movies do seem to get judged by a very different and very strict set of standards by its fans that other movies rarely do. And honestly, these standards don't have a basis in much other than what previous movies have shown or established. In other words, it's not like George Lucas ever sat down and wrote a Star Wars rulebook, or things that can and cannot happen in his universe, or definite ways which the Force works, or a list of different Force powers. Instead, all we really have to go on is by what we've seen in previous movies, which is a very minuscule snippet of the Star Wars galaxy when you really think about it. And don't get me wrong here, consistency and cohesion are good things. You should always take great care not to contradict yourself when making new movies or parts of a story, and to honor what has come before it, a lesson that even George Lucas failed to adhere to when he made the prequels, and seemed to forget such things as Leia saying that she could remember her real mother in Return of the Jedi, or the fact that Obi-Wan doesn't seem to remember Leia at all when he claims that Luke is their only hope in The Empire Strikes Back. Anyway, holding true to what has come before is a good thing, yes, but some flexibility does have to be given to allow new and different elements to be added to a story, or things are going to eventually get stale. In my opinion, it feels like the original Star Wars trilogy is the one and only precedence that is allowed within Star Wars, and if anything new added doesn't mesh up perfectly with rules that maybe were vaguely established in that movie, then they don't fit into Star Wars. And honestly here, that opinion, which is one I'll admit even I kind of hold on to, is never going to allow Star Wars to grow. And what I'm trying to say here in a rather roundabout way is that if Infinity War was a Star Wars movie, the story told within it would likely be scrutinized much more by the fans. And in particular, the plan Thanos has. Because here's the thing about Thanos' plan, and spoiler alerts going forward, it's kind of ridiculous when you really think about it. He wants to wipe out half the population of the universe in order to prevent the suffering that comes from overpopulation. And on the surface, that sounds oddly noble in some ways, and has made him arguably the best Marvel villain to date because he's not just a bad guy trying to do bad things, like most villains are. But quickly, let's take a look at some of the problems with Thanos' plan, problems that get completely ignored by the fan base or people who love this movie. First, population growth is exponential. For example, 45 years ago, the population of Earth was half what it is right now. So if tomorrow half the population of our planet just got wiped out, there's nothing to say that 50 years from now it wouldn't be right back where it is now. And sure, in all reality, it'd take a bit longer, thanks in large part to the utter chaos that would ensue if half of us just turned into dust tomorrow. But my point is that Thanos' plan is not a long-term solution. It's barely a 50-year solution. And I suppose you could argue if, and this is a big if, all these different civilizations across the universe knew that they were culled or cut in half because they let their populations get out of hand, they might take great care to prevent it from happening again. But most likely, many worlds are still just going to become overpopulated again, forcing Thanos to simply snap his fingers once more. Which makes us question how and why he doesn't come up with a better solution. I mean, with all 6 Infinity Stones, he's basically godlike or omnipotent. So why not go the benevolent route and just increase the amount of resources in the galaxy? And the funny thing here is, I still love Infinity War despite finding Thanos' plan, well, rather flawed. Then again, if he did have the perfect plan to alleviate the suffering of overpopulated worlds across the universe, without killing anyone of course, the Avengers wouldn't be fighting him, they'd be handing him their Infinity Stones and saying thank you. So we do have to give some leeway here and remember that Thanos is the Mad Titan, not the rational, I've got a splendid plan that everyone will love Titan. But the thing is, at least Thanos does have a plan, and one we know about and can even relate to. We even know what motivates said plan, because we know he lost his homeworld to overpopulation and a lack of resources. So, silly plan or not, we completely understand why Thanos is doing what he is doing, and it gives us something to truly root against, and a reason to cheer for our heroes as they struggle, and struggle mightily, to stop him. Yet at the same time, there's this strange part of us that can still sympathize with Thanos, which is what truly makes him a great character. Not only that, but we know what motivates our heroes as well. We know why they are fighting this battle because they are very much holding true to what has already been established about them. If you've seen the previous Captain America movies, for example, you know why he is the man that always fights for what is right, and why he would never ever give up. If you've seen the previous Thor movies, you understand his grief and anger, why he wants vengeance upon Thanos. We completely understand things such as why Star-Lord loses his cool when he learns that Thanos has sacrificed Gamora. We feel Tony Stark's pain when Spider-Man turns to dust, because we know the responsibility he feels for him, the almost father-son relationship between them. The reason why, in my opinion, Infinity War works so damn well is because great care was put into each and every one of these characters, not just in this movie, but in all the movies leading up to it. Call it blatant fan service if you'd like, but giving us a movie that is exactly what we wanted to see out of these characters worked and worked marvelously. These are exactly the characters, acting exactly as we would expect them, that we've grown to love over the past 10 years of the MCU, and this was the payoff for following these characters and becoming invested in them, even though they do ultimately fail and fail utterly at the end of Infinity War. But it is seeing this failure, living through it with them, that endears us to these characters even more, and gets us excited to see them come back and no doubt win in the next movie, though at a cost. These, for example, are the reasons why we accept Luke's failure and defeat at the hands of Darth Vader in The Empire Strikes Back, because we were there with them to experience it for ourselves. It's why we accept that he had to be rescued at the end of the movie, that he didn't save the day but instead failed on every single level. And it's why his eventual victory in Return of the Jedi is so satisfying for us. Luke's need and desire to save his friends despite knowing it was a trap was akin to the Avengers giving one last-ditch effort to stop Thanos at the end of Infinity War, despite knowing they couldn't beat him. It spoke to something inside of us all, that desire we have to be heroes, this belief we all have that, in similar circumstances, we'd run off to save our friends from Darth Vader, or that we would challenge Thanos to try and save half of humanity, knowing all too well we were likely going to fail. And at the same time, this is why many reject the Luke Skywalker we got in The Last Jedi, not only because we don't fully understand what caused this fall from grace, what made him lose his faith in everything and to even go so far as to condemn himself to death on an island, but because I believe all of us have this innate desire within us to believe that we can be better, that we can persevere and overcome whatever life might throw at us. And seeing Luke Skywalker, one of the greatest fictional heroes ever, succumb to failure and give up was not only heartbreaking, which I'm sure what the intent was, but it reminds us of our own failings that have defeated us in our own lives, which is not the reason why many people go to see a movie like Star Wars or Infinity War. They don't go to see broken heroes. They go to see heroes that will fight to the last, no matter what the cost. We go to a movie like Star Wars to imagine what we could be, not be reminded of what we are. And look, I don't begrudge anyone who loves what they did with the character of Luke Skywalker in The Last Jedi. If you enjoy the fact that they made him a more relatable hero, then that's fine. It's your prerogative and your opinion. My biggest problem with it is actually that it goes back to motives, which again is probably the greatest strength of Infinity War and the greatest weakness of The Last Jedi. Because all we really know about that fateful moment that broke Luke Skywalker, when he almost killed his nephew, was that he saw darkness in his mind, but we have zero clue what that actually was. In fact, we have zero clue about what Kylo Ren even wants at all, other than to kill the past and to now make things his own, I guess, after vowing in the first movie to Vader's helmet that he was going to finish what he started, which is something he gave up on after Snoke made fun of his helmet in The Last Jedi. And we also have zero understanding of why or for what purpose Snoke turned Ben Solo to the dark side in the first place. I mean, we've been told outside of the movies that he's not a Sith and therefore wouldn't necessarily have to or even want to adhere to the rule of two, which Sith do. So it's a mystery as to what interest he had in Ben Solo at all, why he went through all the trouble of turning him and corrupting him, because, well, we don't have the slightest clue what Snoke ever really wanted. Which all means here we are, on the cusp of two grand finale movies for two different film franchises. One where we have a truly badass, seemingly unstoppable villain that has easily thwarted our hero's every attempt to stop him thus far. A villain with clearly established motives and goals that, for him at least, make sense and we can understand and even relate to on some level. And we also have a plethora of heroes who we have grown to completely understand, to care for, and feel for, who find themselves utterly defeated and have a 1 in 14 million hope of victory. And even though we know that they will probably ultimately win in the end, it will no doubt come at a tremendous cost for them. On the other hand, though, we have a movie where our villain in this last movie is finally going to make up his mind about what he actually wants, after flip-flopping for 2 movies and serving another master who we didn't learn a thing about, who was in charge of a regime called the First Order that we also learned nothing about. This villain is likely going to then be challenged by a hero that's already flat out beat him once and basically played him to a draw a second time. A hero who fights, well, mostly because she wants somewhere to belong, not because she has any real emotional attachment to what's at stake. A hero that foolishly rushed off to try and save this villain, not completely unlike what a different hero in this saga once did, but whereas that hero was defeated on every level and had to be saved himself, this new hero managed to not only escape by herself again, but to still save the day in the end, leaving us to wonder not if she can ultimately win and what price will have to be paid, but only to wonder simply how she'll win and if any price will be paid at all. And look, to be honest and candid with you here, I don't necessarily think The Last Jedi is an all-around bad movie, just like I don't necessarily think Infinity War is an all-around great movie. As I said at the start, each fill a very similar role in their respective franchises, and went about fulfilling that role in vastly different ways. Infinity War was chock full of fan service type moments, and very much embraced the fact that it was part of a much grander story, offering very little exposition to explain the massive amounts of characters and fast-paced story that had multiple different settings. It trusted that those seeing it would be familiar with most, if not all, that had come before it. And as someone who has kept up with it all, I appreciated the trust it put in the audience in that respect, and it very much felt like a thank you to the fans for following the story to this point. The Last Jedi, on the other hand, and this feels odd to say about a Star Wars movie, felt slower paced and, other than Canto Bight, was very focused and had a rather easy to follow story for the most part. Even if you'd never seen another Star Wars movie before, you probably got this movie and followed along. And whereas I don't think it was a bad movie, I just don't think it was a great Star Wars movie, or one that embraced the part it was meant to play in a greater story. Certainly not anywhere near the level Infinity War did. It wasn't fan service or a thank you to the fans. It was instead the last thing most of us expected, and is loved by some for that, and hated by others. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think. Which did it better, or filled its part of the story better? The Last Jedi or Infinity War? Or is it not even fair to compare these movies in the first place, despite the fact that they do have very similar places within their franchises? Whatever you think, leave a comment below, and let's talk some Star Wars and some Marvel. And until next time, thanks for watching.